Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me. My name is Elizabeth Grace. I am an actor, a voiceover artist, and a narrator based in London in the UK. And I'm here today to read you a couple of excerpts from Elizabeth Adams's most recent audiobook, Ship to Shore. I have had the privilege of working with Elizabeth a couple of times so far in my career, and I've loved every moment of it. I think we've become really good friends, and I've learned so much about her and her life. And one of the things actually that I like a lot about her writing is that I can see how much of herself she puts into it. So a lot of you may know her already for her historical fiction, but it's actually her modern fiction that I've been most familiar with and was my introduction to her work. We worked together on the audiobook for Green Card at the beginning of this year, or should I say in the middle of this year, at the beginning of lockdown. And I loved it. I fell in love with her style of writing, the authenticity and the natural dialogue she has between the characters. For a narrator, it was just very easy for me to fall into, and I enjoyed it a lot. And I wasn't let down with Ship to Shore. It's a charming, romantic story of two people falling in love through the old-timey medium of letter writing in this crazy digital world. It's lovely. It really is. And there are twists and turns, and you're gripped the whole way through. And lucky for you, it's a to be continued. So we're going to hear more from these characters in the future, I'm certain of it. What I'd like to start with this book is the prologue. I think it really sets the scene, and then we're going to jump a little bit further on to chapter 6. But I'll create a pause there, so you can pause the video if you want to pick it up at a later date. So do expect a little interval in that. And without further ado, we can get started. Prologue. Yes, Mom, I'll be there in time. Maggie stepped out of her warm Toyota into the brisk November air. She pulled her scarf tighter around her neck and opened the rear door to retrieve a box, balancing the phone between her ear and her shoulder. Yes, I will bring a pecan pie. I said I would. And a Dutch apple, of course. I'll make the cream when I get there. She nodded and mouthed, "Thank you," to the man who held the door open for her. Yes, Sarah is making 2 pumpkin pies from scratch. We're going to the farmer's market tomorrow. After checking the label on her package, she stood at the back of the line in the thankfully warm but stuffy post office. Yes, I'm bringing a dress. I always look nice. Maggie made an apologetic face to the woman in front of her. Yeah, I'm at the post office. I can't really talk right now. The line moved forward, and she was only 2 people back now. People go to the post office. It's a perfectly normal thing to do. Yes, it is. Because I don't have a social secretary? She sighed and dropped her head as her mother continued talking. No, please don't invite Brad. We only went on 3 dates. There was no chemistry. It matters to me. Next. Mom, I gotta go. I'll call you back. Maggie quickly hung up the phone and put it in her coat pocket. It began vibrating a minute later, but she ignored it. I have a box for the Letters of Love campaign. It's letters and a few dozen cookies. Want to send it express? It's $8 more. Sure. The cookies will be better fresh. The man behind the counter was clearly uninterested in the contents of her box, as long as there were no flammable materials, weapons, or liquids in it. He told her it would be x-rayed before being sent as part of procedure, and slapped an express label on it. Thank you, she said with a smile, and happy Thanksgiving. He nodded and called for the next customer, and Maggie left the building, happy that her obligations for the day were through. She popped into her favorite Chinese place for takeout and double-checked that her sister had remembered to get wine and chocolate. She was nearly home when her phone rang again. Hello, Mother, she said tiredly. I am happy to hear from you. It's just been a long day. No, I did not get fired. Why would you think that? She rolled her eyes and focused on traffic as her mother continued to extol the virtues of the most recent man she decided would be her son-in-law. Mom, I really appreciate that you're looking out for me, but I'm not looking for a husband or a boyfriend right now. Because I'm just not. Why do I need a reason? I'm happy with my life as it is. I'm focusing on my career. She knew she'd made a mistake as soon as she said it. Now she would have to listen to her mother telling her how Sarah has a career. Something that requires a doctorate is a career. Teaching snotty children is not a career. They're not that snotty, she thought acerbically. Yes, Mother, I know. Sarah is practically perfect in every way. Her mother continued on, saying Sarah had just been an example and there was no need to get nasty. Why was she being so sensitive? Mom, traffic's picking up and I need to focus. I'll be there Wednesday evening on time and I'll bring the blue dress. I promise. Bye. Love you too. She hung up with another sigh and drove the last 5 minutes in silence, taking deep breaths and telling herself it was just Thanksgiving. It was only 2 nights with the whole family. She could handle that. Hey, little sister, Sarah called when Maggie walked into the kitchen and plopped her bag on the counter. Hey, big sister. Maggie began unpacking the food and set plates and cutlery on the counter. I got wine and chocolate in the living room. The fire is on and the TV is ready. What do you want to watch? Something with costumes, please. Sarah raised a brow. Rough day? Actually, no. Great day. But Mom called. Sarah winced. Sorry. I guess I shouldn't ask how that went. It was exactly what you think. She wants me to come early and get my hair done by her girl. Apparently she's a whiz with difficult hair like mine. She made a face and Sarah smiled sympathetically. She's also inviting Brad Whitaker to dinner, even though I practically begged her not to. Oh, seriously? You guys didn't even like each other. Zero chemistry. Thank you, that's what I said. But as usual, I was overruled. Sarah smiled and gave her a hug, squeezing extra tight. Some things never change. Yeah, at least we have something to rely on. Her sister laughed lightly and led the way into the living room, where they sank into the sofa and tried to decide what to watch. Oh, you said your day was great before. Do anything fun? Yes, actually. I got my class and a few others at school to participate in the Letters of Love campaign. The kids traced their hands on construction paper and cut them out to make turkeys, and they wrote something about a soldier on the front. A soldier is kind, a soldier is brave, things like that. I bet some of those were pretty funny. Yeah, my favorite was, a soldier has superpowers. Sarah chuckled. Sounds lovely. Oh, did you get to do the baking project? Yes, I was so relieved. I thought the cafeteria manager was going to be difficult about it, but she let us take over the kitchen for an hour, and the kids had a great time. A few moms came to help, and one told me afterward that it was the most fun she had had at a school event. Wow, that's some praise. Yeah, Maggie said softly. Sarah squeezed her arm. You're a great teacher, Mags. Don't let anybody tell you differently. Those little third graders are seriously lucky. Thanks, Sarah. Now, let's watch something with top hats and corsets. I need to unwind, she said with a mischievous smile. Deal. So that was the prologue. Ooh, slipping out of the American accent there. I'm going to have a little pause in the video now, so if you want to pause with me, you're welcome to. And we'll jump into chapter 6 when we're back. All right, hey, welcome back. We're going to jump right into chapter 6 after that quick break. Chapter 6, Fly Me to the Moon. Hawkins stared at the screen in wonder. She'd said yes. She was coming. In just 3 days, he would stand face to face with the person who had become his closest friend of late. He quickly looked up his favorite hotel and requested 2 rooms, preferably next to each other. They confirmed 5 minutes later. 2 rooms on the top floor, one with a decent view of the city and an adjoining door between them. It was perfect. He quickly sent Maggie an email telling her the exact dates of his shore leave and the name and address of the hotel where he'd booked neighboring rooms. She responded 10 minutes later that she had found a flight and would see him in a few days. She landed just before 3 and would meet him at the hotel in the lobby. "What are you smiling about?" Hawkins turned abruptly from the screen, shielding it with his back. "Davis, what are you doing here?" Davis looked at him suspiciously. "Just wanted to say hi and see what you're doing for shore leave. Thought you might want to go for a hike." "That sounds good. I'll have to let you know." "Do you have other plans?" Davis teased with a grin. Hawkins bristled. He wanted to keep his plans for himself for just a little while, just to savor the idea on his own, but clearly that was not going to work. "Maggie is flying out to meet me." "Maggie Stone?" "Yes." Davis's brows were comically high, and his mouth was opening and closing repeatedly. "Well, that's... wow. Okay." He was clearly at a loss for words, and Hawkins couldn't help a chuckle from escaping. "I'll ask her if she likes hiking. Maybe we could all go. I'm sure she'd want to meet you." "Yeah, sure, that'd be great," Davis said slowly, his hand rubbing the back of his neck as he grimaced slightly. "Night, Davis," said Hawkins with an amused smile. "Night." "What are you doing?" asked Sarah. "Packing," answered Maggie. "So you're really going through with this? You're going to fly across the country to hook up with some guy you've never even met?" Maggie forcefully shoved a pair of flip-flops into the pocket of her suitcase. "We're not hooking up. We have separate hotel rooms, I checked. Rooms that he's paying for. I'm paying for the flight. It's a way for us to see each other and split the cost. If he were coming to me, he would sleep on the couch." Sarah looked slightly horrified. "This is no different. He invited me, so he's providing the accommodation. It's not that crazy." Sarah gave her the look she always used when she wanted her little sister to know she was being silly. "And just because I haven't met him in person doesn't mean I don't know him at all. We've become good friends," defended Maggie. "Through letters?" "Yes, through letters that I started. It's not like we met on some cheesy dating site. It's the U.S. Postal Service." "Still," Sarah said hesitantly. "If I had met him on a dating site, would you be this freaked out about his meeting?" "Meeting? No. Flying off on vacation together? Yes." Maggie sighed and looked her in the eye. "Would you care this much if he was a girl?" "What?" "If I had been writing all this time to a woman and we had become friends, would you care that we were meeting for a vacation?" Sarah thought for a moment, then sighed. "I suppose I wouldn't be so worried, but I would still want you to be careful. You hardly know this guy." "I know, and in some ways you're right. I don't know what his laugh sounds like, or what expression he makes when he's annoyed, or whether or not he's a morning person. But I do know what matters to him most. And I know his sense of humor, and that he is honest and kind and generous. I can't say that about half the people I know in person." Maggie closed her suitcase and zipped it shut, then faced her sister with a determined look on her face. Sarah sighed loudly, then dropped her arms to her sides in defeat. "All right, I'll drive you to the airport." "Thanks, sis." Maggie sat back on the plane and thought about what Sarah had said. Was she making a terrible mistake? Did Hawkins expect something she wasn't prepared to give? No, of course not. She shook the idea off immediately. He was her friend. He wouldn't lure her into some tawdry situation. Besides, she was a big girl. She could look after herself. If it was awkward, she could always get her own hotel room. She'd have to charge it, but it was hardly the end of the world. She put on her headphones and decided to stop thinking about it. She had never been to San Diego. She was looking forward to seeing it. Plus, she seriously needed a vacation. The flight was uneventful, and before she knew it, Maggie was in a back seat on her way to the hotel. She had done a quick search to make sure it was somewhere she would be comfortable staying, but otherwise knew nothing about it. The car pulled up in front of a beautiful Art Deco-style building in the Gaslamp district. She had seen a few pictures online, but they didn't compare to the real thing. She gasped in surprise and couldn't keep the smile off her face as she strolled into the lobby. Hawkins saw her as soon as she walked in. He immediately stood and walked towards her, stopping before he got too close. Maggie pulled her eyes away from the gorgeous architecture and looked ahead to see a tall, dark-haired man in a white uniform. "Hawkins?" she blurted out without thinking. The only thing currently running through her mind was an expression her grandmother would use when she met a good-looking man. Tall drink of water. "Maggie, you made it." She resisted the urge to sigh at the sound of his voice. It was deep and rich and chocolatey. She smiled and he closed the distance between them, taking her bag from her shoulder. "The elevators are this way," he said. She nodded and followed him. They stood waiting for the elevator in awkward silence. "Did you have a good flight?" "Yeah, it was uneventful. You?" She closed her eyes in embarrassment as soon as the words left her mouth. "Sorry, of course she didn't fly in." He smiled. "We got in just fine." The elevator doors opened and they stepped into the empty carriage. "This is a little awkward, isn't it?" "Yeah, a little. I feel like I know you so well, but at the same time, not at all," she replied. "I know what you mean." She laughed nervously, and he half smiled, half grimaced. "I'm Maggie Stone," she said, suddenly. She extended her hand in front of her, and after a moment, he took it. "Lieutenant Commander Hawkins, at your service." She smiled brightly at him, the most genuine smile he'd seen from her yet, and he couldn't help but return it. The elevator opened to the top floor, and he led her to her room. "This one's yours." He opened the door and carried her bag into the room. He set the keycard on the table and turned to face her. "Are you tired? Do you want to rest before dinner? Or are you hungry now?" She smiled at his desire to please her, without being pushy. "I'm not hungry, and dinner in a couple of hours would be nice. I don't need a nap, but I'd like to shower and change before we do anything. Do you have any plans?" "Not exactly, but I do have a list of things to see. I thought we could pick from that and play it by ear." "That sounds perfect." They talked for a few more minutes, then he left her with plans to return in half an hour. Maggie closed the door behind him and sighed. The hard part was over, she hoped. She unpacked and hung her dress in the closet and put her toiletries in the bathroom counter. She took a quick shower and spent 5 minutes staring at her clothes. How was she supposed to decide what to wear if she didn't know where they were going? She decided on casual, a pair of flattering trousers and a flowy blouse, topped off with colorful earrings and comfortable flats. It would work for multiple situations and still be comfortable. Right on time, Hawkins knocked on her door. He smiled when she saw he was wearing the whites he had been in when she met him. They discussed options and decided to take a short bus tour that was leaving in 30 minutes. "I like to take a tour when I first arrive in a city. It helps me acclimate and get an idea of what I want to come back to," he told her as they walked out of the hotel. "That sounds like a good idea. How many times have you been to San Diego?" "More than I can count. Have you ever been here before?" "No, I haven't, but it's been on my list for a while." "Did your family not like to travel?" he asked carefully. He knew her family had some kind of money, She'd mentioned it in her letters. He didn't want to offend her by asking, but he thought surely they had taken family vacations. Yes and no. My dad was always working. Still is. My mom preferred to go to the beach house and on shopping trips. I went to New York with her a few times when I was a teenager. And when I was 12, the whole family went to Mexico. We stayed at a resort and swam with some poor trapped dolphins in a little pool, but I didn't love it. He nodded. Is that the only time you've left the country? No. My grandmother took me and my sisters to Jamaica when I was 15 for a girls' trip. I enjoyed that a lot more. We were staying at a resort again, but Sarah was 20, so my grandmother let me out with her and we went to markets and questionable restaurants and climbed Dunn's River Falls. Sounds like fun. It was, but that was the last time I left the country. I almost did a semester abroad, but my mother thought it was too dangerous and talked my father out of paying for it. I wish now I'd just gone anyway and taken out a student loan. But I didn't think that at the time. It's hard to disobey your parents when you've spent a lifetime listening to them. Tell me about it. She rolled her eyes. Is that our bus? She pointed to a group of people around a kiosk and a bus that had just parked at the curb. Looks like it. They took their seats and listened to the tour guide, pointing out things to each other as they went. She was more excited than he was, unsurprisingly, but she could see that he was happy, and that she was happy, so she didn't hold back her exclamations. He quietly pointed out things when the tour guide was silent, and she enjoyed the sound of his deep voice in her ear as he leaned close and pointed across her out the window. You have a very pleasant voice, she said suddenly. He looked surprised and flushed a little. I didn't mean to embarrass you. I just wanted you to know that I like it. She smiled sweetly and he returned it, and they focused their attention back on the guide. The tour lasted nearly 2 hours, and they chose to get off and explore instead of riding back to the hotel. They walked leisurely and window shopped for a while before finding a small restaurant nearby. It was on Hawkins' list of dinner options. He had a piece of notebook paper covered with ideas folded up in his pocket. He'd asked the captain for recommendations, and the concierge had given him some good ideas too. He wanted to have possibilities for day and evening, casual, and a couple of nice places just in case. He still didn't have a smartphone. He'd never really seen the need for one until now, and he didn't want to appear incompetent and bungling in front of Maggie, or expect her to choose everything. She was supposed to be relaxing. This looks great. Maggie smiled at him over her menu. It's a favorite of the captain's. He grew up here. Sounds amazing. I would have loved to have grown up in the water. Really? I thought you preferred the mountains. I do love the mountains. There's something incredibly majestic about them. I can't deny that. But mostly I love it because my grandparents live there. The beach I love for itself alone. He smiled. I can understand that. Of course you can. You're a waterman. A waterman? She laughed at his confusion. It's from a book I read as a kid. The father is a fisherman, and years later his daughter lives in the mountains and has her own child. She tells her husband their son will grow up to be a waterman. She just knows it. She can see it in his hands. In his hands? Hawkins looked skeptical. Like palm reading? No. His hands were strong and broad and capable. Like a sailor's, she added softly. Her eyes were glued to his hand, where it rested on the table. Hawkins swallowed and reached for his glass. Maggie returned her eyes to the menu. Do you know what you're getting? I was thinking the lamb shank. You? The duck looks good, she said, keeping her eyes down. He noticed her cheeks were slightly flushed and smiled a little to himself. The waiter arrived then and suggested a wine that would complement their meals, and they ordered a bottle. It took a few minutes, but eventually they got into a groove. The appetizer was delicious, and the wine helped them loosen up. She told him about the school she worked in, and all about her students and co-workers. He told her about being in training at the academy and his first tour.
I remember the first time I stepped foot in Singapore. It was the craziest thing I'd ever seen. So many people and buildings, but so clean.
How old were you? She asked.
23.
Wow. She shook her head.
What were you doing when you were 23?
Studying for my master's.
Where?
In Nashville, at Peabody College. It's part of Vanderbilt University. He whistled quietly. She chuckled. I wanted to go to Sarah Lawrence, but my father wouldn't pay for something so far away. I think he didn't really care for himself, but my mother hated the idea of me moving away from home. She wanted me to commute to UNC, but I refused. Vanderbilt was a compromise. He nodded and leaned back in his chair, his hands folded across his waist, and tilted his head as he watched her talking. Why are you looking at me like that?
Like what?
Like that. Like you see all my secrets. He smiled.
I don't see all your secrets, but I'm happy to listen if you want to tell me any.
She laughed. I'll stick with the lighter material tonight, but thanks for the invitation. Conversation came easily, and before the meal was through, they had covered everything from politics, a surprisingly civil conversation even when they disagreed, to their favorite foods. She found out that he hated sushi but loved seafood, and he learned that she was a total burger snob. If it wasn't perfectly cooked and seasoned, she wanted nothing to do with it. They agreed that sweet potato fries were one of the best food trends in history, and both hoped they would never go out of style, unlike gelatin molds, which they were more than happy to see the back of. He insisted on paying when the check came, and she only agreed to it after he accepted her offer of lunch the next day. They left the restaurant happy and full and just a little bit tipsy.
What do you want to do tomorrow?
He asked as they walked down the street. They had decided to stretch their legs a little after such a filling meal. I wouldn't mind getting some shopping in, but I don't want to bore you.
Depending on the type of shopping, I wouldn't mind.
I want to get a present for Sarah, and I should get a little something for Davis. He's been so generous with his time. My students are completely in love with him. Hawkins smiled.
That's nice of you. He'd probably be happy if you bought him a sandwich, but he does have a penchant for brightly colored shirts.
She laughed. Really? Do you know his size? Hawkins thought for a moment.
Maybe a medium? I don't really know. He's a bit smaller than me.
Okay. Maybe I'll find him something tomorrow, if we go shopping.
We can play it by ear. You might be tired from traveling. You did cross a continent today.
She let out a jaw-cracking yawn, and he chuckled. Sorry. I guess you won't believe me if I say I'm not that tired.
Yeah, you've sort of blown your cover,
he replied with a grin. I'm a little sleepy. Should we head to the hotel?
Sure. Do you want to get a cab back? It'll be a long walk.
She looked up the street and didn't see any taxis. It might be easier to order a lift. He looked at her with one brow raised. Or an Uber, if you prefer, she added. He continued to look at her strangely. You don't know what I'm talking about, do you? He made a sheepish face.
No, sorry.
Don't apologize. I suppose there's no need for you to ever hire one in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. He looked relieved, and she continued. They're ride-share services. Normal people can use their cars to take people around for extra money. You order one and they pick you up wherever you are and take you wherever you want to go.
Like a temporary cab. Okay, I've done that before.
Did you use a different app?
No, we just flagged down cars and whoever stopped was our ride.
You just flagged down regular cars driving down the road. He nodded. Driven by total strangers. He nodded again. Like hitchhikers?
No, we paid them. And if they didn't want to go where we needed to go, they said no and drove off.
She stared at him in astonishment. That sounds crazy. He shrugged. Where did you do this car flagging?
Mostly in Eastern Europe. Kiev, Lviv, Prague, Krakow, Warsaw, Bratislava.
Her eyes got bigger. You've been to all those places?
Yes.
But they aren't on the water.
He smiled. I do sometimes travel inland.
She flushed and laughed. Sorry, I didn't mean to be rude. I just meant that I didn't realize you traveled so much outside the Navy. He shrugged again.
I was given a few weeks off leave while my ship was in the Baltic. I hopped around a fair bit with a few other guys.
She shook her head. Wow. Just wow. That would be so amazing. I want to hop around a fair bit. He laughed.
Do you have a number for this ride-share business? I'm pretty beat.
He pulled an old phone from his pocket, ready to dial. She smiled and shook her head. There's no number. At least I don't think there is. It's an app on a smartphone. She pulled hers out of her pocket and tapped away for a moment. Okay, a black Honda can be here in 3 minutes. They stood side by side on the sidewalk, stealing glances at each other, and in Maggie's case, at his phone.
You can say it.
Say what?
You've been wondering about my phone.
He looked at her knowingly, and she gave him a sheepish smile. Just a little. He shook his head.
Davis is constantly ragging me about it.
Can I see it? He handed it to her warily. Wow. Does it get good reception?
Yes, usually.
She turned it horizontally and slid the top half up to reveal a keypad underneath. I used to have one like this. Brings back memories. She smiled and handed the phone back to him.
You're not going to say anything else?
He asked, a suspicious expression on his face. What do you mean?
You're not going to tell me it's time for a new phone and that I should step into this sanctuary? This century?
No. Did you think I would say that? He thought for a moment.
I don't know what I thought, actually.
He looked at her silently.
But I'm glad you didn't.
She smiled shyly and looked down, then back up when a black car pulled up a few feet away. That's all right. All right, that was the end of chapter 6. I hope you enjoyed the reading, and I hope that it's compelled you to go and download the audiobook. It was a pleasure to read for you today, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks.